Hey, this is Jen from Midnightsky Fibers. I'm here to talk to you today about naturally dyed vegan yarns. For those of you who don't know me, I run a natural dye studio that uses only natural dyes and non-toxic mordants, and I make a lot of both vegan and non-vegan hand-spun yarns. Natural dyes are a great earth-friendly way to make vegan craft projects. They're especially good for knitting and crochet, since you can make some really interesting hats and scarves, especially out of small amounts of hand-spun yarn that are really interesting. First, dyes that are vegan. Not all natural dyes are vegan. There are several, especially cochineal and black, that are commonly used that are not vegan. Really common vegan dyes would be dyes like madder, indigo, pomegranate, fustic, everything from onion skins to coffee to tea leaves. The reason that some dyes are not vegan is that they tend to be insect-based, especially cochineal is the most famous of them because it's an insect that is literally dried and ground up for the dye. So if you're vegan, you want to make sure when you're buying naturally dyed yarn that you're looking for yarns that do not contain insect-based dyes. Mordants for natural dyes are usually vegan. Alum is the best mordant to look for when you're looking at naturally dyed yarns because it's non-toxic, it's quite safe, it's used in making pickles. It can be dumped down the drain much more safely than many of the other mordants can be. The benefits of natural dyes versus chemical dyes are pretty huge depending on if you're looking for local or small co-op run fibers. Many of the natural dyes are harvested and raised by small communities, co-ops, and indigenous peoples. Many are organic. Most of the dyes that I use at Midnightsky Fibers are natural dye extracts that are organic and or fair trade. And since they are natural, it's just the plants, there are less or no chemicals used in the making of natural dyes and natural dye extract. The problem with natural dyes is that it tends to be a lot more expensive to buy naturally dyed yarns because it's very time and labor intensive, making the dyes and the yarns both much more expensive. The dye process at Midnightsky Fibers can take up to 2 weeks for both vegan and non-vegan yarns and fibers, and that doesn't even include the spinning time. You know, it takes several hours for each batch of yarn or fiber that I'm dyeing just to mordant them, and then a couple more hours to just to dye them, and that doesn't even include all the time it has to sit heating or anything else in the meantime. So it also takes up a lot of space since I have to age the fibers between the mordanting and the dye process. So very time intensive. The other downside is that it tends to take up a fair bit of water, especially for people who switch over from chemical dyeing to natural dyeing. They use a lot of water in the process. I use a special process that involves a lot of gray water being reused, so my water process is very low. I dye out of my apartment and my water bill is lower than almost everyone else's in the building. So clearly I'm doing something right if I'm still managing to dye yarn while everyone else in the building has the same water bill as me. But point being that compared to chemical dyes, natural dyes take a lot more water. The other thing about natural dyed yarns is, of course, that not all natural dyed yarns are vegan. Most natural dyed yarns out there are made from wool, and when you go and you look for naturally dyed yarn, especially naturally dyed hand-spun yarn, most people do not separate out the vegan yarns from the non-vegan yarns. They might separate out the plant-based fibers, but they won't separate out the plant-based fibers that are vegan. One of the nice things that I hear from vegans about Midnightsky Fibers is that I separate out the vegan yarns from everything else, just because it makes it a lot easier than people having to ask me questions every time about whether or not cochineal is vegan. And so one final more word before I show you a couple examples of naturally dyed vegan yarns. You want to be sure that you carefully check your knitting and crochet supplies, as I'm sure most of you already know. A lot of your buttons and crochet hooks and knitting needles can be made from bone, horn, and ivory. Not something a lot of people really think about, especially if you're using vintage supplies, but something that you want to avoid if you're vegan. but who am I to talk since I'm not vegan? Just vegetarian. So here's a couple of examples of some naturally dyed vegan yarn. So this is a naturally dyed vegan yarn. It is bright yellow with black stripes, kind of like a bumblebee, and it's been spun around a white cotton core. Let's see if you can see it a little bit more there. This is what's called a single or a one-ply yarn. This is made from bamboo that's been dyed with fustic, which is a plant base. There's no insect dyes to it, which is wonderful. Of course, it's mordanted with alum, since I only use non-toxic mordants in my dye process. Here's another example of a bamboo stripe yarn. This one has several plies to it. I think it has 2 plies here. Yep, 2 plies. And it's been dyed with fustic and some nice logwood to make the nice purple color. Logwood gray, which has a little bit of iron in it, gives it that nice muted purple color. Bamboo feels a lot like silk and soy silk in the way that it's been processed in this one. So it's great for those nice drapey projects. And here's one more final example of a hand spun yarn. This one's really unusual because most people aren't even working with this fiber yet. So this, see how huge that is? This would be an example of a bulky yarn. This is made from recycled soda bottle fibers. So it's pretty awesome. This is the recycled soda bottle fiber that has a fiber staple length that's very similar to cotton. So it's very soft, very squishy. Because the staple length is so short, I've spun it in with cotton. So you can see, if you see it up close, with cotton, and then I've plied it with cotton again to give it a little bit more stability. A single ply in this case would just pill, you know, like all the sweaters that are like cheap sweaters that you throw in the wash and pill when they're done, and you wouldn't want that. So a yarn like this one is what a lot of people use to make as an alternative to non-vegan yarns for really bulky hats and scarves, whereas a lot of vegan yarns like these ones are what people use as alternatives to non-vegan yarns for scarves, shawls, wraps, and garments. So yeah, great. Hope you enjoyed learning about naturally dyed vegan yarns. Thanks. This is Jen from Midnightsky Fibers.